To begin this program this morning, I'd like to introduce Reverend Andy Jacob, who's the pastor of Hanover Presbyterian, and our host this morning.
Oh, well, thank you. Good morning. Is it too late to say Happy New Year? I'm still feeling it. Well, you can see that we're people who have a hard time letting go of seasons. We're still doing Christmas here, at least through tomorrow. And my goal and our goal is always that we make up in hospitality what we lack in parking. So thank you for coming in and indulging us. There is coffee and tea and things to nibble on. And if you have the need, there's a restroom right outside this door. So welcome. I don't know about you, but I've been haunted this week by a number that I can't get out of my head. Our president spoke to us twice. And the number I can't get out of my head is 30,000. 30,000 people. That's almost half the population of our city. 30,000 people. And I say that not to be a downer, but that this gathering is justified, this gathering is needed. And so my hope and my goal is that each of us hears something that we decide we can do individually, and then as a group, we hear something that, and thank you for being here to help us figure out what that might be, something that we can do as a community to make our community a better, safer, more whole place. And I've asked to open with an invocation. I would be happy to do so, very mindful that there are folks from many different faith traditions, and so let us gather our hearts and seek the presence of the Holy One to move and guide us. Let us pray. Creator God, we thank you for gathering us, and so it is in your name and by many names that we appeal to you to bless us, to inspire us, and then to lead and guide us, so that we would arrive in that place where you would have all of your children be, that place of righteousness and justice and peace. Amen.
So good morning again. My name is Jeffrey Lott. I'm the person who sends all those emails to you. Just before we start, I have a couple of announcements. First of all, the Pachamanteras, who is one of the founding partners of Movement for a Culture of Peace, is having a film series. And on February 9th, they have a film called Armor of Light, and it's about gun violence and change. Medard, where is that going to be held? Westminster Presbyterian Church. It's at 7 p.m. So just go to the Pachamanteras website for more further details about that and the rest of their films. They're also showing something on American Muslims. They're showing a film called This Changes Everything. I just bought that book, actually. And so it's sort of about, well, I can't tell you what about because I haven't read it yet. That's one thing, and I'd like to introduce my friend June Isley to talk about another program that is being co-sponsored by Movement for a Culture of Peace.
Hi, everybody. Movement for a Culture of Peace and the Delaware Council for Global and Muslim Affairs are co-sponsoring a program. The last Sunday this month, Sunday, January 31st, at Silverside Church, in the afternoon from 2 to 4, we'll have 3 young people on the panel sharing their experiences of what it's like to be a Muslim in America at this time. And Professor Khan from the university will respond to us and let us know how we can respond to the rising tide of Islamophobia. So we're looking forward to this. I hope you'll spread the word far and near, and you'll be getting emails about it. If you signed up here today and we can read your writing, we will be sending you an email. Thank you.
Thank you, June. This will also be posted on the Movement for a Culture of Peace website early next week. So what do we have here?
I just thought you should recognize Senator Brian Townsend and Councilwoman Shanifa Shabazz.
Oh, okay, thank you. I want to just welcome, especially this morning, Councilwoman Hanifa Shabazz, and whose efforts are on in many ways behind what we're going to be talking about this morning, and also Senator Brian Townsend. Where are you, Brian? Okay, hi. So this is one of the largest crowds I've ever seen for our program, and I'm really grateful that you're here. Before we begin, I'd like to just say, can you hear me okay? Okay, before we begin, I'd like to say just a few words about the Movement for a Culture of Peace. We're at a kind of a crossroads right now as an organization, as a coalition, and we're going to be asking for your help in February to bring more and more organizations together behind the banner of peace. What we're proposing is a Peace Week in September, modeled after Peace Weeks in other cities, with multiple events organized by many different kinds of organizations. But we need to start planning now to do something like that. So we'll begin that planning in February and hope that you or a representative of your organization will be there. We're going to be issuing invitations. Now, our founding partners for Movement for Culture of Peace in August of 2014 were the Wilmington Peacekeepers, One Village Alliance, Patchman Terrace, the Delaware Coalition Against Gun Violence, a group called Heeding God's Call to End Gun Violence, which is Philadelphia-based, but wants to be here, and members of First Unitarian Church. And our work has been supported and endorsed by more than 50 other organizations, faith groups, nonprofits, community groups, including Hanover Presbyterian Church, this is our 4th forum here. We held our first one here in November of 2014. We're grateful for all of you who came out, and our mission of the Movement for Culture of Peace is to connect all of us into a powerful movement that reaches across religion, race, social class, economics, and geographical boundaries in Delaware. And we think we've been modestly successful at that, and we want to continue. Our definition of community is really sort of based on Martin Luther King's idea of the beloved community. And on the King Center website yesterday, I found this, and it's a description of what he meant when he used the words beloved community. For Dr. King, the beloved community was a realistic, achievable goal that could be attained by a critical mass of people committed to and trained in the philosophy and methods of nonviolence. It is a global vision in which all people can share in the wealth of the earth, in the beloved community. Poverty, hunger, and homelessness will not be tolerated because international standards of human decency will not allow them. Racism and all forms of discrimination, bigotry, and prejudice will be replaced by an all-inclusive spirit of sisterhood and brotherhood. Those are powerful words, and we're aiming for that. We're aiming high. We have a big vision. Our vision is that Delaware will become known as a place where the beloved community actually exists, where Black lives truly matter, where we have made a remarkable transition from a culture of violence to a culture of peace. We're thankful today for our panelists, and before I introduce them, I have something to ask of you about what we're doing next month. We want to expand our connections with dozens of groups, organizations, faith groups that are working across the community to make peace happen. So on Saturday, February 6th, instead of a panel discussion like this, we'll be holding what would we call it? A grand meeting of hearts and minds. Yeah, that's what I wrote last night. So we think the time is ripe now for many individual peace movements and groups to take this big leap forward, to come together for the beloved community in ways that help all of us make a bigger difference. So look for our invitations for this. We're specifically targeting organizations so that we can build our coalition, but individuals are certainly going to be welcome, and it will be a public event. So during Peace Week, which is September 18th to the 25th, we want to collaborate and cooperate and celebrate peace as never before. And we may even march on City Hall. So our panel this morning, thank you for coming, is Secretary of Delaware Department of Health and Social Services, Rita Landgraf. It's the principal agency in charge of keeping Delawareans healthy and providing children, families, and seniors with essential services that they depend on. Rita is a formerly executive director of the National Alliance of Mental Illness, NAMI, of Delaware, and of the ARC of Delaware, which advocates for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Also with us this morning is Senator Margaret Rose Henry. She has served in the 2nd Senatorial District for 20 years. And I'm still young. And she's still young. Thank you. Yes. Senator Henry is currently the majority whip in the Senate, and she's a retired program coordinator for the Women's Center of Delaware Technical and Community College. And Representative Stephanie Bolden. T? T. Bolden, okay. I didn't put that in my notes. Stephanie T. Bolden. She represents District 2 in Wilmington, East Side, in the General Assembly. She's a retired teacher from the Christina School District. And before her election to the legislature, she served 5 terms on the Wilmington City Council. So we have an illustrious panel here, and we're going to begin this morning with a presentation by Secretary Landgraf. You can come up here if you'd like, if that's what we'd be most comfortable doing, and the PowerPoint is over there, and I hope everybody can see it. Oh, I'll talk about the cards and all that stuff in a minute. Here, go ahead.
You want me to go first before you talk about the cards? Yeah, okay. Okay, thank you, Jeff. And good morning, everyone. It truly is an honor to join you this morning, and I really appreciate the number of people who came out, especially on a Saturday morning. And I do want to express my appreciation to the Culture of Peace, the Delaware Coalition Against Gun Violence, and George Higgins for inviting me here today. And before we start, I would like to begin by acknowledging and remembering all of the individuals and their loved ones who are lost to gun violence that our city of Wilmington has experienced, and even across our state, what we have seen across our state. So could we just have a moment of silence in memory of all those who have lost their lives? Thank you for doing that, and thank you for your tremendous dedication to bring forth health and wellness within our communities, and especially with a focus right now on our city of Wilmington. As the Secretary of Health, we do talk a lot about health, but wellness is also critically important. Community wellness. We know that when neighborhoods and communities are healthy, individuals then are healthy as well. So I just really appreciate this level of commitment and dedication. Now, what I had asked to do this morning is to spend some time talking about data. And this is extremely important data, and what we can do with this data, and what we have learned and can continue to learn about this data. But we must never lose sight that as we are talking about data, we are talking about real individuals. That's what this data represents. Real people, real lives, real losses to families and our communities. I would also like to express my extreme appreciation to Councilwoman Hanifa Shabazz. Hanifa, I'd like you to stand up. Hanifa, in her wisdom, proposed a resolution back in December 2013, requesting that the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention assist in an investigation of gun violence and provide us with meaningful recommendations actually to advance preventative action. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about how this continued to occur, this work with the CDC. From June to July of 2014, CDC scientists, and this is a science, came to Wilmington at the request initially of Councilwoman Shabazz But they started working with local and state officials. And what did they do? The CDC collected data from various state agencies and institutions, including Christiana Care in Delaware. And in March of 2015, they returned to Delaware after they analyzed all of that data that had been collected over all these institutions and state agencies to present to us the primary findings and their initial recommendations, and it was presented to the mayor of Wilmington, to members of city council, and to the governor's cabinet. The CDC continued the statistical analysis, and they needed a peer review. And why they needed that was to ensure that how they analyzed this data was statistically sound and valid and reliable. And the peer review was done the fall of 2015, and in November they released their final report, which I believe is on the Department of Health and Social Services website. So if you go on the website, you can actually see their final report, which I will be talking actually from. The report is one that looks at gun violence actually from a public health and social service perspective. Remember, this is the Center for Disease Control. They are very concentrated on population public health. They also looked at the root cause of the violence, and that led them to what we call, and what you will be hearing about, is a predictive analysis, okay? So the common factors, what did they look at as they explored this data? They looked at, from 2013 data, the gun violence and the perpetrators of gun violence within the city of Wilmington. Then they asked, what are the common factors that each of those perpetrators have that led them to commit gun violence? So is everybody with me? That's what we call root cause analysis. So you take, that criminal justice data, you look at, are there common factors with all these individuals who have perpetrated gun violence? And then that led them, because there are common factors, that led them to a predictive analysis. What can we do relative to those common factors to do early intervention and predict when individuals may be impacted to prevent gun violence for the future? All right, everybody good? So the report does not look at violence from a law enforcement perspective or one that intends to designate individuals as potential criminals. We actually want to prevent them from becoming engaged with our criminal justice system. It is a lens that looks at a variety of complex factors or indicators that could lead a person to pick up a gun and hurt another person. And how can we then use that data, maybe in real time, to intervene early before anyone ever does get hurt, or as soon as possible shortly thereafter. These early interventions would not reduce or replace short or long-term law enforcement efforts that are required to address the gun violence we are experiencing today in Wilmington, including those mentioned in the report from the Public Safety Strategies Commission. We must fully recognize that the public health solution will take time to yield results and must be in addition to the ongoing law enforcement solutions. Today in my remarks, I would like to do three things for you. First, I'd like to explain to you the rationale for the approach of the Center for Disease Control Investigation in Wilmington. Secondly, I would like to share with you what we have learned from their data, and which was our data from their analysis. And lastly, I'll run through our next steps relative to creating an ongoing predictive analysis. Now, for the people in this room, Wilmington is a city that's actually like many American cities in that it essentially has two stories to be told. On one hand, there are many parts of the city that are beautiful, historic, and economically important to our entire region. But on the other hand, Wilmington is also a city with significant pockets of poverty and crime. As you know, unfortunately, gun violence has been a major and growing threat to our city residents, with the city often ranked near the top of homicide or crime list. In fact, Delaware's growth in violence has been substantial, which has influenced a good deal by the Wilmington area. This figure, what you see here, shows how homicide rates have changed over the last 13 years. From the year 1999 to the year 2012, the increase in homicide rates in Delaware markedly outpaced that of all other states. So that's from 1999 to 2012. You see Delaware close to the bottom there with that line going far out. So the question that the CDC researchers explored was, how do you prevent community-level urban firearm violence? So that's what they worked from. That's their initial framework. When talking about individual-level risk factors, we've learned over the years that many of these risk factors are often very deep, fundamental experiences and characteristics of a person's life and their environment that aren't quickly fixed. These are things like living in impoverished conditions, low educational attainment, being raised in an unstable household, being abused or neglected as a child, and being exposed to violence and victimized in their past. We call that childhood adverse effects. And how does that impact? These risk factors are difficult to change. We all know that. Intervening on them requires an individualized, coordinated, and sustainable approach. So then, how can we possibly begin to meaningfully address these deep risk factors that so adversely affect individuals and are associated with violence? CDC staff began the investigation by trying to learn more about the individuals who have been involved in gun crimes in Wilmington and about the preceding patterns in their life, what happened to them prior to engaging in gun violence. The hope was to be able to shed light on how Wilmington could get further upstream in terms of preventing that violence. Staff first analyzed arrest records for violent gun crimes in the city of Wilmington between January 1st, 2009 and May 21st, 2014. So that was the time frame that they looked at the arrest records from 2009 through and then May 21st, 2014. A violent gun crime was defined as a homicide, an attempted homicide, aggravated assault, or robbery with a firearm. From the police data, 569 individuals were identified from about those last 5 years, okay? 569 individuals they were looking at. You will see from this chart that the majority of individuals out of that 569 over those 5 years are young, up to about the mid-30s, okay? 95% of them are male. Next, CDC staff looked across medical. Remember, first they start with the arrest records to analyze those 500 and what they look like in age and gender. Then CDC looked at their medical, child welfare, criminal, employment, and education records to learn about the common patterns that were occurring in these individual lives, those 500 lives, for the purpose of trying to better understand how can we assess risk, high level of risk, of becoming involved in urban gun violence, and thus offer support and intervention to these young people. CDC staff focused on trying to better understand what we call sentinel events, and those are events that happen before these young people are involved in gun violence. Let me show you the major categories of the sentinel events the CDC looked at and how often these sentinel events occurred in those individuals' lives who were involved in gun crimes. All of the statistics here come from administrative data that were made available only on a one-time basis. And that's important for you to know because we have some work to do relative to how do we access data on an ongoing basis, because there's legal issues around that, or maybe. Almost half of the individuals who have been arrested for gun violence have themselves been a victim of a violent injury. So they were victims first, for which they've gone, okay, and victims for those violent injuries when they had to go to the emergency room within about the past 10 years. Remember we took the 500 individuals who committed gun violence over 5 years. We went back 10 years to see if these individuals were victims of gun violence and what we have learned from that. This includes things like being shot by a firearm, 13% were shot by a firearm, being stabbed, 5% were stabbed, being in a physical fight, 19% were in a physical fight, episodes of self-harm, 8%, and altercations with police, 20%. In terms of interactions in the area of employment, 86% of those individuals were unemployed in the preceding quarter. Okay? Learning a little bit more about those individuals. Now, on this slide, you see interactions involving our child welfare investigation, juvenile services, and school system events. Some of the percentages are rather high. Some of them are not so high, but what the CDC found is that, generally speaking, the young adults involved in gun crimes had multiple adverse life events, multiple sentinel events before they committed a gun crime. Let me try to show you that in a different way, beyond just providing percentages. Let me give you a better picture of just how common some of these sentinel events can be. In this chart, I'm showing you a timeline of 4 emergency department-based sentinel events for all individuals up to about their mid-30s. You'll first notice there are 4 segments to the figure which indicate the 4 emergency department-based sentinel events starting with gunshot wounds and continuing on. That's all the way to the left. Okay? Along the y-axis, which runs vertically, is each of the individuals from 1 to 421. Then on the x-axis, running horizontally, is time in years, starting from the year 2000 up to the year 2014. The black lines you see are comprised of individual black dots running from the years 2009 to 2014. For each of those 421 individuals committing gun violence, the black dot is the day they committed the gun crime. Okay? Starting with the first segment, which is gunshot wounds, each red dot represents a sentinel event. In this case, a gunshot wound. Gray lines there are drawn between the red dot and the black dots to give you a sense of the time elapsed from this sentinel event to the gun crime committed. Okay, everybody with me? All right. Now let's continue to go across the segments. You can see the number of stabbings where, it says the blunt weapon injury is the next one. That's the number of the blunt weapon injuries, the physical fight injuries, which goes next to that. And then visits for suicide attempts or thoughts, and emergency department visits where police are involved. Okay, so just give you a moment to kind of absorb that on the slide. Remember, this is science-based, what the CDC is doing.
Rita, on that last, the encounters involving police, but can you give an explanation for all, the cars on the line,
Yeah, let me, okay. The black lines you see are comprised of the individual black dots running from the year 2009 to 2014, okay? Now, the black dot is the day they committed the gun crime. And so starting with the first, starting in all those segments, each red dot represents a sentinel event. Or the purple would be. So whatever color you see there, for the gunshot wound, they use the red dots. But it represents a sentinel event. The black dot is the day they committed the gun, the day that they injured somebody with the gun.
And I think also to note that there might have been 4 or 5 encounters by the same individual with either being shot.
Right, or... That's right. Now let's move on to the child welfare. Remember, because we're looking at what do all these 421 individuals have in common? So child welfare. This slide shows similar events in terms of child welfare, right? So look at that, right? Specifically, investigations of potential child maltreatment and out-of-home placements. So this is all what they had in common. A lot of things going on right there. Same theory, okay? The black dot is the time, at the time that they committed the gun violence. All those other dots are where are they interacting with the child welfare system. Yes, it's the same timeline as the slide previously, 2009 to 2014, all right? Now, just because they had I do want to say this, just because they had an interaction with the Division of Family Services does not mean that they're all substantiated, but we do know that if they had an interaction with Child Protective Services, that there was some level of stress that was occurring somewhere in that child's life. And an opportunity to intervene. That's the key thing, an opportunity to intervene. Jan.
the red, green, blue dots, like 421 for instance,
Good. Yeah.
is that the same person? So
Yes. It's the 421 people. Yes. Remember, they started, just as a reminder, they started with over 500 arrest records, right? And then they brought that down to 421. This data represents the 421 individuals who committed gun violence within that certain time frame, okay? So this all represents those individuals. What common themes do they have going on as individuals that led to gun violence, all right? Everybody with me? All right. So now juvenile justice system. This figure shows sentinel events involving our juvenile justice system, community probation involvement, residential detention, and behavioral services involvement. Same individuals, 421 of them, same theory, black dots at the time of committing gun violence. Things that occurred with that individual leading up to that. Okay, everybody with me? Okay. And here you have education. And this slide stunned me. This was the slide that I said, oh my goodness. When I saw the suspension, which is all the way to the left, and the expulsions, and to the right of that is dropping out of school, or school dropouts. All of these centennial events the CDC looked at represent, again, those data points that when taken together can be indeed used to classify the vulnerability, the risk level for violent behavior. I know. It's stunning. Is it not stunning? It's solid. It's solid, yeah. So there you go. But, okay, stunning, but rich, right? Stunning, but rich, because what does that tell us? This is what a predictive analysis can do for us. Again, this is a prevention model. We in public health want to prevent disease. To me, violence is disease. We now have a tool, an additional tool in our toolbox that we know, even with limited fiscal resources, where we can spend time and energy, right? So when you think of social services, I'm talking broad. I'm not just talking health and social services. We can do this within our school system too, within our education system, within our juvenile justice system. So when you hear social services in this aspect, broad, how we can touch lives, how we know that if we start touching lives for our highest risk individuals, children and youth, we can change this level of gun violence in our future. All right, so I want to talk about what the CDC then, and I also want to, for example, listed here are 20 pieces of our administrative data that the CDC looked at that can inform inform our risk assessment. Typically, what risk assessment tools do is assign a certain point of value to each of those sentinel events that you saw in those previous slides, and the more influential ones get more points. Okay? And so, ultimately, everyone gets assigned a score relative to their vulnerability. So the higher the score, the higher risk they have for committing gun violence. But we also know they were victims of gun violence, right? And that unique combination of those events that were had in that individuals, those 421 individual lives. In the CDC's investigations, they worked to develop a pilot test of this scoring system using a sample of state records. Remember, this and that, we need the science behind this to ensure it's valid and reliable. Now, in this slide, I show you an example of how important looking at and using these risk assessment tools and scoring can be. This slide focuses on young men, ages 15 to 29. Do you remember what I said, what percentage of those who committed gun violence out of the 421 were male? 95%. That doesn't mean that women don't commit gun violence, and it doesn't mean that women aren't impacted by gun violence, but indeed in this particular sampling of what was occurring over those time frames, 95% were male. Okay, so women, and do you remember what I said about how old they were? Under 30, yeah. Okay, so what the CDC further did was focused on young men ages 15 to 29. This highest risk population for involvement with violence. In the CDC's pilot sample of administrative data of 15 to 29-year-old males, there were 209 youth who had very high scores. Remember, they're testing their scoring model on that risk assessment. So out of that 429, the sample of 15 to 29-year-olds, 209 youth had very high scores for risk, giving them an estimated risk of 90% or greater. So out of your 421, 209 had that highest risk score of 90% or greater. Ultimately, 205 of those 209 young men, nearly all, were subsequently involved in firearm crimes over the study period. So just by taking that sampling, we know that their scoring, their risk assessment is valid and reliable. The CDC used science to prove that connection. So why are risk assessment tools important? I think I just shared that with you. They are important because they often make good service delivery possible. From the health lens, we know those with the poorest health outcomes get the most support. This is no different. This is no different. It's like chronic disease. Youth who have had multiple adverse life effects and are at risk of violence involvement need individualized, coordinated plans with highly integrated and coordinated services across all systems, inclusive of health and social services, children's services, education, neighborhood support, faith-based, and employment services. Now, let me explain what are some evidence-based or promising violence prevention strategies that can be used or build upon. Some might already be occurring in our state and in our city, and build upon to create a customized package of services. First, as I mentioned earlier, the CDC found that youth who were involved in gun crimes generally had problems in multiple areas of their lives. The first area was frequent violence exposure, right? Remember when you heard that? And violent injuries that led them to the emergency department. They probably had even more injuries of violence that they didn't have to go to the ED, right? As noted, street outreach programs like Cure Violence, as well as multiple other programs collectively, known as hospital-based violence intervention programs, are designed to engage with young people in ways and relevant ways and link them to ongoing assistance. There's an intervention right there, right? Because we're talking about where can we start intervening earlier to prevent. Second, unemployment is clearly a major issue. Job placement and support models exist that can be adapted and have been widely tested in other fields, such as mental health. Third, many of the young people in the CDC's pilot investigation had indeed experienced trauma. Probably all of them, leading to investigations by Child Protective Services, receiving appropriate counseling, such as cognitive behavioral therapy, can reduce the effects of trauma. Trauma-informed care can reduce the effects of trauma. CBT itself has, and that's cognitive behavioral therapy, has been demonstrated to reduce the risk of crime by about 25%. Evidence-based, we know. Fourth, many of the young people also had prior criminal involvement. There are a number of individual and family-focused programs designed to help children with all of these unique challenges. Lastly, we saw that school problems were frequent. Both individual and group school-based programs exist to help address and prevent conduct problems in schools. We understand that the CDC study did not produce an operational plan. It was never intended to do so. The report did provide, however, recommendations, so let me take a few minutes to explain those and detail our next steps. The foundation of our future work will be built on our ability to possibly overcome some legal barriers in order for us to effectively share our data across our systems. Remember, the CDC got a pass to do so one time. That requires us, and we're currently in that process, to do a comprehensive legal review that will look not only at possible legal issues involved in sharing data, but as well as privacy concern. You know, we have HIPAA, and that's so how do you effectively share your health data, FERBA, and that's part of education's data. So indeed, in order for us to advance this continuous model, we have to have remedies in place that enable us to actually share that data and better then drive our intervention services to those who actually are at the highest risk of need. We are partnering with the University of Delaware and other key stakeholders in order to provide guidance on actually how to build the capacity to share that data between our various government and social service agencies and other organizations. We envision that that will require us to reach memorandums of understanding on that data sharing and may even require legislation. And some of it might be federal, but we're working on that. Once that critical work is done, then the technical people will need to come together to link those diverse systems in order for that data sharing to continue to occur. Because remember, we want to continue to do this. This isn't a one-time thing. We want to do this all the time. It's rich in explaining to us how better to support those citizens most vulnerable. From there, we can refine that risk assessment tool by using the full administrative database and begin to identify individuals most at risk for becoming those perpetrators of violence. Each young person identified, then we can focus on how do we offer more of an individualized plan that is indeed evidence-based, highly integrated, and coordinated across all those systems that I talked about. Now, I want to recognize my Deputy Secretary, Henry Smith. Henry? Henry has been working diligently in looking at how do we also advance and get community-based input. That's critically important for us, and we want to do that in conjunction with the City of Wilmington to form a community action or a community advisory board comprised of representation from all sectors, and that builds on the strength that the City of Wilmington has to offer and its collective citizens. The advisory board will provide guidance on the best way for us to do real-time interventions that are needed to again end this cycle of trauma that too many of our young people continue to experience. As a summary, here is a graphic for you relative to the steps that we must take to implement these recommendations, and all of them will indeed take time because this research is indeed novel. Delaware is the first state, thanks to Councilwoman Shabazz, where the, yes, please. Where the CDC has actually conducted this type of research, and not to go political on you, but you know that the CDC can only conduct relative to gun violence. There were some restrictions, and I think we were very fortunate that when they looked at this, that they did indeed say this is something within their purview, that they could actually come and do this level of rich research from a population health perspective. So we're very indebted to them. They're very excited about this. They're scientists. They get very excited about this data and then the reliability and how valid it is. So they really, this I think has also provided them on the federal government and as scientists with a great opportunity, because we know that violence isn't only impacting us in Wilmington. You know, look at Chicago, Baltimore. We're seeing it across our United States. So it gives them a vehicle to also take this to other states and advance from that perspective to really advance prevention. That's really what this is, especially for our future. So There is no existing model to replicate this research or to implement programs in response to it. So Delaware is the city will be a leader in this. And we do anticipate that the CDC will continue to offer us technical assistance because of that. So we need to reach, we need to reach agreement on the data sharing that you heard about with the relevant organizations. We have a team of about 10 lawyers that are looking at that. I'm not a lawyer, you can tell, right? That law is complicated, and I cannot assure you that we will not encounter barriers to one or more of the databases with this information, but we're dedicated to work through those barriers, which may require legislation. However, we have done our initial review of the multiple complicated privacy laws and have not, here's good news, have not identified at this time that there are any absolute barriers. So we're off on at least a good start. Our next step will be to discuss that data sharing agreements with the custodians of that information. Remember, and establish a vehicle, probably a memorandum of understanding of some sort in order to do that. Secondly, we need to connect the data systems to identify potential recipients of these individualized targeted services. So not only sharing data to come up with the model that continues, like these are the people highest at risk, but then what do we do, right? Then we need to ensure each agency then creates an integrated plan to support those individuals that we need to support. I would like to take a few minutes to clarify what may be a misconception about what the CDC report told us. First and foremost, the CDC report did not identify individuals by name. The CDC conducted analysis on an anonymous basis. We do not know who these people are, their identity. The CDC also did not give the state recommendations on what we should do with the information, assuming that we are able to use it to target specific individuals or groups for that receipt of those services. This issue is more complicated than the data sharing issue alone, because we need to balance an individual's right to privacy, and we take that obligation very seriously. Both state and federal law have strict rules regarding sharing of individually identifiable data, and this is no different than what we ran into when we did that cancer cluster work. And with Delaware being small, it becomes further complicated because of the small amount of individuals that then, even through data, the public can identify that individual. So we need to really be careful about individual civil rights. But at the same time, be innovative on how can we still advance, and even with those issues, because we can. I know we can. But I wanted to share that with you. When the identifying data is shared, it is within privacy laws and agreements with strict rules about any disclosure. In the interim, we hope to use the data then in an aggregate way, de-identified form, to identify meaningful programs and then do intervention. And that is not new to my Division of Public Health. As I mentioned to you, cancer clusters, we know where they are in our state. We know where we need to do more individualized supports in those communities, do more screening, and then also do more treatment. So we're reaching the people that are at the highest risk. This is no different. Everybody with me? Okay. And third, we want to bring the advisory council together to support the development of a highly integrated and coordinated customized service. That's where I believe the advisory board, all that other stuff, we have the responsibility to do. But then we need the community to help frame what do those customized services, right? Once we identify, what do we do? And some of those services are already occurring, but we're not bringing them to scale. So we need to identify where are those services, and we, as funders, where do we invest to bring up to scale for the most vulnerable? for the most vulnerable. And how do we do that as state agencies in a more coordinated fashion? Because good thing, I call it, well, Henry gave me this, pockets of innovation. That's Henry's term. But I use it, it's a good one. So we know we got good things happening, but we're not bringing it to scale. We still have a lot of trauma that's occurring with our children and our youth. This data tells us that. Okay? So that's where our focus will be primarily in engaging that community work, and then all that data stuff will continue to go on in the background so we can get that vehicle, get all that in place. But meanwhile, they work hand in hand. Because I don't want to create the vehicle, get all that data in place, and then create the services. We can't, all hands on deck, right? Time is of essence. So thank you all very much. Thank you. I don't think I took anything of yours.
You're good. I feel like I've just been to school. Thank you. Thank you so much. Is anybody here not more enlightened than they were, when they walked in the room? That's just remarkable. Our fourth panelist has arrived. Daryl, you want to come up? Is he here? Okay, we'll forge ahead. The way the movement has wanted to frame this discussion is through the idea that we have at our hands a very high level of information and advice, such as this report. The other report that we will talk about a little bit more this morning is the report of the Wilmington Public Safety Strategies Commission, which was issued last March and contained about 100 recommendations for the improvement of policing in Wilmington in order to combat violence. So we have in our hands a tremendous amount of really good information, high-level stuff that was done through research and through interviews. The science behind this is just impeccable. It really is. And I don't know much about that kind of data science, but it sure looks good to me. So on your chairs you have some cards, and if you wish to ask a question, we'll ask you to just hold your card, write it on your card, and hold it up, and one of our folks from the movement will come and pick up your questions. But first I want to give Senator Henry and Representative Bolden an opportunity to introduce themselves, react to that report, and maybe give us a little more of a segue also into the strategies report. Margaret?
Well, first of all, thank you.
There is a microphone on the table there. Thank you.
First of all, it's on. I would like to really, first of all, start by thanking the Movement for a Culture of Peace for bringing us together today. Because one of the things I realized when I came in the room is that when the majority community cares about what happens in the minority community benefits. And so I'm not being racist, but I want to thank white people for being here too. And I mean that most sincerely, because those of us who've had the honor of representing our communities have been struggling, and we feel we have kindred spirits now who've joined us and who too are concerned and who too will not let things continue to fester as they have been. So I want to say that first. I want to really thank our phenomenal secretary here because she has such heart. And it's obvious in the way she gave the report that she cares so much about what happens to children and families in Delaware. So we're very, very fortunate to have a person like Rita at the helm of this important thing. Absolutely. You know, I've seen the CDC report, but I've never had it analyzed the way the secretary did it, and so it opened my eyes to a lot of possibilities of what can be done. And we're to talk, I think, a little bit about some potential legislative aspects. But before I do that, I want to talk about the fact that we've been doing a lot of work on the criminal justice system and reform.
And I've spent I don't think I had a summer, because I've been in more meetings with the Chief Justice and the courts than I've ever had in my life. And I want to say that Chief Justice Leo Strine, I keep accusing him of getting out of his lane, because he's in everybody's lane. But he's really concerned about making a difference, and you don't see a Chief Justice doing that. And so that gives me hope that there will be change. He has told his courts and all their chiefs that he wants things done differently. We've been looking at bail systems this summer. We're looking at legislation right off the bat. We're looking at the 3 strikes then you're out legislation, you know, because that's harmed a lot of people. And quite frankly, a lot of people, particularly minority people, as you know, are the majority in our jails in Delaware. They're here for low-level offenses where they should be in treatment programs and not in jail. So if we can begin to make these changes to our court system, then it will help on the other side. One of the things that I've always thought about, and I was a social worker before getting into, I think I'm in government now, but one of the things that I realized and recognized was that minority families suffer from not having males in their homes. And we don't think about that, but when people go to prison, they're going to come back home. And frequently, they could not come back home because then the family wouldn't get food stamps. I'm not bragging, but I passed a law that allowed that to stop. You know, I mean, it's such a small thing when you think about it, but when you can't go back to your family because you might harm them, that's a serious situation. A lot of the young children who are misbehaving or misguided are because they don't have role models. The mothers, 30-year-old women are grandmothers now. I mean, so this is systemic, and it's something that we all have to have great concern about. And change takes time, but it also takes tremendous effort. So I'm just so excited to see all of you here today. I'm not going to talk a lot about legislation because I want to hear from you so that you can empower us to go back and do the things that you want to do. And I want to give a shout out to my senator who's here, Brian. Brian did something really, really wonderful for the Hispanic community to allow them to have the right to drive, and I want to recognize him for that achievement. He's one of the good guys in the Senate. We don't have all good guys, but he's a good one. But seriously, we're going to be looking at criminal justice reform. The other reform that I want to mention quickly, and I'm going to let my colleague, because she likes to talk. She has good stuff to talk about. I want to mention that we have to do education reform, because everything we talked about starts when school, you know. And we have the neighborhood schools reform stuff going on. We have bills before us. We need to get people on board because folks are not willing to step up. And we need to hold these legislators accountable and make them vote and do the right thing. Children in Wilmington cannot continue to suffer. And as a result, this is what you have. This is what you have. So there's a lot of work to be done. We've done some of the groundwork, but we need your help. And again, I want to tell you how grateful I am to see people of all colors here. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. And I, too, am grateful for being here and being able to share some of my viewpoints as a native of Wilmington, Delaware, and native of the state of Delaware and the city of Wilmington all my life. I, too, would like to give a pitch out, first of all, for you to, if we have to do legislation, we need you to make the legislation happen. We have put out several pieces of legislation that just can't get on the floor or voted on. So we need you, Rita, if we need to do this, to be able to call your senators, your state representatives, and if it's local, you need to call your council people, and also to get these things done. I just wanted to say from a different perspective that everything that was presented here today are things that I have lived and things I have seen successful here in the city of Wilmington, as well as how it deteriorated. And so I'll just give you just a little bit of history. First of all, everybody's familiar with it. If it's not broke, don't fix it. So what we have done over the years, if it wasn't, we started to break it eventually. Back in, neighborhoods that we used to have before, you knew the person that lived next door. our kids could walk to schools because our schools were in our communities. Our centers were available for recreation, and we attended church. Eventually, our neighborhoods changed because busing invaded our communities, centers became resource centers, and parents' involvement disappeared. Today, we're considered what? Murder Town, USA. And we've heard all the reasons why and why we got to this point. But just let me tell you a little bit about where we were from 1993 to 2000 under the auspices of Mayor James A. Seals. We had 105 shootings one year. And when that 105 shootings occurred, we got to work immediately. Those shootings were mostly on the east side of Wilmington, Riverside, East Lake, North Market Street, which was 24th, 23rd, 22nd Street. One of the things that were implemented that came up, and I am going to take credit for it, was the Camera Watch program. And that Camera Watch program put cameras in 10 high crime areas of the city. And I want to recognize Jay Macklin, who was with Delaware Trust, the name's changed so much, that helped us to get the funding just to start that. Jay, stand up, and continues to be involved today. Those cameras were, when they were put up, first we did have a little problems in terms of the privacy, et cetera, but however, they were on public poles, so they weren't peering into anyone's home. And it brought the crime down. It went to 8th and Pine. There were cameras at Taylor and Bennett. There were cameras on 24th and Market, Lamont Street, all over on Northeast Boulevard where we had the problems with the motorcycle group. And all of that crime, we were able to combat that and bring those things down as a result of it. Well, and the cameras were located at the police department so that they were able to see as our officers were going out into these neighborhoods to be able to protect them. This was very important because we wanted to protect our police officers, but we were also protecting our neighborhoods. There was another program called the East Side Substance Abuse Awareness Program. And that was a program that brought together, and that was done through the Criminal Justice Council under Jim Kane. That brought all the agencies and groups together that were on the east side is where it started first. So we did with the schools, we were with the community centers, we had parenting classes going on, we connected with drug treatment centers, and all these things were happening. And I'm saying this because everything you mentioned in that report points back to this. And these were the things that were in place. We had employment as well. I did employment training when MBNA first came in. We showed them how to write resumes and also how to do mock interviews. So we were working. Riverside got involved. The people were getting jobs. And what came out of this in terms of housing? We had 2 Hope 6 grants. One was for Macaulay Court, which is on 11th Street, and it got national recognition. It's all home ownership. The other was for Village of Eastlake. You remember the bucket. That's where a lot of the crime was, shootings, and kids were living there. And you know what else was over there? The first charter school under the state of Delaware, which was Eastside Charter. Right there. But you know what? Those kids got some of the highest scores there were because you had people that were going there teaching them, working with them, that cared about them. So we got all of that, got involved. That was torn down. And what do you have now? You have the Village of Eastlake, which is home ownership and rentals living among each other. Another national award for the state of Delaware. So we implemented community policing back then. And our officers walked the streets. We had a unit which was community policing. We had over 25 officers in that unit. They walked the streets, they were in specific areas, and they were allowed to stay there so that the people there got to know them and they were able to work with them, they trusted them, and they would give them information. As a result of that, I see Kevin Kelly has left, we got the communities involved. We had drug marches. And Kevin was a big part of that. That's why I wanted to mention him. And we had what was called National Night Out, where everybody would come from every section of the city and march to Rodney Square. And there we were able to network and talk about the things that we were doing in our neighborhoods, share, and be able to replicate some of those things in our own neighborhoods that other neighborhoods were doing. We had what was called mini police stations. And that was buildings that people would allow us, the police officers, to use, and they were in the communities. The first one was at 12th Street over there where Prestige Academy now is. That was the very first one where officers were there in the community. People could come there, network with the officers, talk to them, and felt safe in their communities. We also brought in what was called the chief of police from Charleston, South Carolina, who had cleaned that city up. He brought his program here under Chief Pratcher. And that, I know, I just want to get this information out because it's so important. These were the things, see, she says I can talk, but it is of substance, don't you think? Okay. So just a few more. I want to go there, and I just want to say where we are today. Okay, so then you had we had a High Point, North Carolina, WITN seed here, and then, like I indicated, we did the Hope 6 projects, and today, where we need to go and what we can do, again, we need to bring back community policing unit. We need to use the Crime Commission report that has been given so that we can get these things done, a lot of which were in place before. We had what was called the Wilmingtonians, when you want to talk about jobs, that gave jobs to people that had been incarcerated, were coming out. They would clean the streets and would keep our city clean and safe. And we need to rebuild our neighborhoods by letting people know where jobs are and what the training is that they can get. We have Delaware Skills Center. We have Central Baptist Church that is working with young people and giving them a license to work with some of the unions. And the big part is they can't just be in the buildings and we can't talk about them. They need to walk the streets and recruit people to let them know what's available to them. And the last thing I'll say, the last thing I will say is in reference to education. As a teacher, I know when I was able to walk to my school and be able to be involved in the neighborhood, that was very important. So I'm asking you, each one of you also, to work with us to get this educational plan for the city of Wilmington. We have no input in the education of our students here in the city of Wilmington, and we need to have this plan going forward. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. It's going to take a few years, but we need your support in getting this passed with the State Education Committee, and then getting it passed in the General Assembly and in the Senate. And I have a lot more to say, but anyway, I know the time is of the essence, but I thank you for the opportunity, and I hope this was some informative to you.
Thanks to all three of you. I've got a whole fistful of questions here, and several of them at first for Secretary Landgraf, but please raise your hand if you want to make an additional comment. One person says, missing from the CDC report are the number of high-risk individuals who are, quote, employed, unquote, in the underground economy, i.e. the drug economy. And also accessibility of firearms to high-risk individuals. That's a gun policy question. Were these just too political to be addressed?
It wasn't part of the study.
It wasn't part of the study. Can you use the microphone, please? We only have one up there.
I do have a big mouth. It was not part of that study. The study was to actually look at the root cause of that gun violence, so it didn't do a deeper dive into those areas. But I do want to take a moment, because there's another activity that will possibly touch upon the drug trade and working within the underground drug trade. We are part of a high-intensity drug trafficking grant, and it's just dedicated to Newcastle County in Delaware. We're part of a regional, and I don't know if you may have seen that Director Botticelli from the White House, they call him the drug czar, came to Delaware and announced that at Christiana Care back in the spring. And what the president is doing is dedicating not only dollars to really look at those high-intensity areas where drug trafficking is occurring. We're part of the Philadelphia, Camden, and Newcastle County is all part of that work that's going on. But also, from a population health perspective, they are working with investigators and now a public health official, what we call as an epidemiologist, that will look at that level of data, which will probably get to that drug trafficking area and who is actually engaged in that, and more to come. And I know I've been working with the Philadelphia, because the Philadelphia region or city is actually the ones that got the funding, but they committed to me, and also Attorney General Matt Denn's engaged with this on the criminal side of it, Newcastle County, Colonel Setting as well, because you know there's a lot of activity going on to really get to those drug traffickers, but now with the insertion of a public health professional engaged with that, we will also be able to look at that level of data.
Thank you.
There was a policy issue there too.
Yeah, well, it was gun control, which
Well, in the last few years, we've tried to pass a lot of gun legislation, and we've been somewhat successful. But as you know, the NRA is a very powerful lobbying group, and I applaud our president for coming out so strongly. Yes. You know, it was so heartfelt. And if you're an American and you live in a city like we do and we experience violence, gun violence all the time, why would we not want to support this effort? So you're going to probably see some more gun legislation. We've passed some. You know, having people register is a big deal. I passed one bill about lost and stolen guns have to be reported because of straw purchases. You know, some people buy them and then they say, "Oh, I didn't know it was missing." I mean, but these are these are tools to help law enforcement. To be quite frank with you, the problem is the Wilmington police need to get up off their ass and go out in the street and look at the crime. I'll be honest with you. If you look at the deployment things, and no one is here to talk about the Public Safety Strategies Commission, but the biggest problem is we have enough police. They're not working. I don't know where they are, but they're not on the street and in the neighborhoods where they need to be.
Representative Bolden, you mentioned the cameras that were installed and the drop in crime. What we're hearing is that many of the cameras that were installed are no longer working, and that there's some issues around who's actually watching and at what hours of the day. Can you address that?
Yes, thank you. Part of the commission's report did deal with the camera program, and it indicated that where Downtown Visions is, they needed to go in and revamp that entire process, put more monitors in there, and be able to hire retired police officers that would manage the cameras. You have two sets of cameras. You have the neighborhood cameras, and then you have Downtown Visions, which was two separate entities initially. Our neighborhood cameras were at the police department. They were moved to assist Downtown Visions with their, of course, budget and maintain them, which I objected to when I was on council. Anyway, what needs to be done, we need that money that was asked for in part of the commission report to be able to redo that. Prior to it being moved to Downtown Visions, because they were lay people, some people were calling their friends and letting them know when they were on the camera and what was happening, so that discontinued that. But we do have Shot Spotter, which they did start to include now, and it has assisted with some of the shootings that just occurred over the weekend. They were able to manage to locate the bullets, and also were able to arrest that person. So it's another thing with the money, the budget part of it, but we're hoping to get that in.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but the Joint Finance Committee this fall appropriated $1.5 million
Correct.
for Wilmington,
That's
with
correct.
a few strings attached.
Well, the strings were that you would report your deployment. In other words, how do you utilize the police you have? Where are they, and what time are they deployed, and how many hours do they work, and all of that? And the city has quite frankly said, we're not going to tell you that. So the state says, well, we're not going to give you the $1.5 million to have more patrols and more coverage. So we've reached an impasse. The city is hiding behind the fact that they think it has to do with home rule, that we're going to take away their right for home. That is not what we're about as their representative. We want our city to be safe and for people to feel secure in their homes. Property values are down in Wilmington. You can't sell your house. You know, employers won't locate there. So this impacts everyone. It impacts the state of Delaware, and we shouldn't allow the mayor to continue to be able to do this, quite frankly. The council, by the way, the city council supports that. I want to say that the city council have taken a vote to support giving the deployment information. Why is that such a big secret? Citizens have a right to know how police are being used. They work for us. You had a question you wanted to ask.
How, given that situation, how do we, and those of us who live in Wilmington, how can we support you
In the city
in getting that 1.5 million, in getting the
You need, correct. You need to march on the mayor, and you need to hold a sit-in, and you need to tell him that you're not going to take it anymore, that he has to let this money come into Wilmington to help with the crime.
And I don't mean to put the chief of staff on the hot seat, but Gary Fullman is here, and he can take that information back to the mayor. I'm sure he will be, right?
He just started working.
And he just started working.
This is a question for Secretary Landgraf, and perhaps for our legislators. There's two questions suggesting that foundation money might be applied to the data collection and the setting up this kind of system. And they've mentioned the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation or the Rodell Foundation. Have you considered that kind of funding?
I think the funding from the foundations, probably there's going to be a need for the intervention services. I believe the data collection piece of this we may be able to actually cover within, because remember, it's existing state agencies. We've already been working with the University of Delaware and our Medicaid program to actually collect that data, what we call mining the data, to give us some insight relative to how to develop our services in a way if we see common patterns across that delivery of healthcare. And that data will also be instrumental for this work as well. And so we're seeing that would probably be the vehicle that we could also apply this data with the U of D. But I would recommend, funding has a tendency, and just like Representative Bolden talked about, like some of these things have deteriorated over time that were in play that actually would make sense relative to how did we get here. The CDC actually did an analysis of how root cause with these individuals who were committing gun violence. Representative Bolden and Senator Henry talked about at one time, how did we address these issues in this geographical area? I would say foundations have to be at the table with us and looking at, because they too, the Delaware Grant Makers, the Delaware Community Foundation, United Way of Delaware, all those funding communities want to really look at how do we collaborate in a way that we bring things up to scale to get what they call as that collective impact. I would like to see those dollars going towards actually creating those intervention direct services, because many times those things are sacrificed first.
Thank you. Margaret, do you want to comment on that, on outside funding?
No, I
Okay.
think she's answered it.
Okay, so here's a question for anyone, and particularly, I guess, for Secretary Landgraf because of her great presentation. If a parent sees these risk factors in their child and knows the child has access to a gun, is there some means to call for an intervention today to mitigate the risk of violence?
Absolutely.
To engage social services or even to remove the gun?
Absolutely. Absolutely. This is not to say that we don't do any intervention while we're waiting to create a coordinated, individualized level of intervention. If family members know, or if neighbors know, or if communities know that there's somebody that's at risk to themselves and to others, please indeed report that. We have at the Department of Health and Social Services a mobile crisis unit that actually works. We like to work hand in glove with law enforcement to come out and actually assess that situation and work with that individual. So everything I said is not to negate that we wait until we have things in play before we intervene. Did you want to say anything?
I just want to say, Rahima, did you want to make a comment about what we said? But before that, grandmothers take guns to the police station that they find their grandchildren have. So parents don't want these young people to have these guns. Sometimes they're afraid. But if we can create an opportunity where they can turn the guns in without having to worry about where did the gun come from? Is there going to be backlash on my child? Blah, blah, blah. That's something that can happen.
Don't we do that occasionally, a gun?
We have a gun buyback, and Senator Marshall has another one. They are really not successful, to be frank with you, because people come in from Maryland and other places with old shotguns that are older than I am, and they get $500 for them, for the hundreds of thousands of dollars we spend, maybe 3 or 4 really good guns that came off the street. So that's just my personal opinion. Don't tell him I said that, but it's how I feel. And we have, he's planning another one, and it looks good because all these guns come in and you're giving money for them. But, the young people have ways of getting guns that, and we have to change the culture and the mindset. And if we don't create opportunities for young people at an early age to know that there's another profession other than that, then we're gonna lose. So this is a big deal. That's why you need to tell the mayor to take this money. Thank you.
There was under the East Side Substance Abuse Awareness Program, which I wish that you would look at to see some of the things that may be able to be utilized. Mona Byard, she was the intervention specialist that went out to homes that dealt with kids that had been affected by gun violence, et cetera. So there was a program in place back during that time, 93 to 2000, which is no longer in place.
I'm sorry, may I have a privilege?
Please recognize the senator.
She wanted to make a comment, and she was on the funding. Would you?
Yes.
And would you say who you are?
Rahima Schwarman. I know many of you here, and I think this is great that we're all here, and I'm very concerned about action. Okay. About the funding, it's really great to talk about foundation funding. It's very difficult to get, and even more so than that, many of our foundations, whether they're in Delaware or nationally, they may have an area of interest for 2-3 years. And then they go, wow, there's something new and sexy out there, we're going to fund this. We need long-term sustainable funding. And the only funding that's really long-term and sustainable are public dollars. Mm-hmm. And we determine how those dollars should be used. So I just wanted everybody to think, even though United Way is great and we have all these wonderful institutions here that provide funding, they don't provide long-term sustainable funding. So we need to be aware of that. And another thing that's happening is in terms of, I'm telling you, I have heard nothing about prevention. I've heard that intervention, which is great, but what about prevention? What about helping those that are not even born, or those who are 5 or 10 now, not to become embroiled in a lack of human concern? And that's what we're really seeing. If that didn't tell you, I've been here for 30 years now. Everything's, Stephanie Bolden talked about, we can go back even further than that. So we can't just rely on the flavor of the month or the flavor of the year. I want to know, what's the administration, the next administration, are we doing something to make certain that what we're talking about will actually go to the next administration that gets elected by us? We've got to grandfather in. We can't just say, oh, maybe the next governor, or maybe the next mayor, or maybe the next senators or council people. we also need to be more engaged in understanding what is the role of city council? What is the role of the General Assembly? How do we help people to really understand what their rights are? So here we all are, and I'm sure even if we took a poll right now, some of us would not be clear about what these responsibilities and roles are and how we can affect them. I loved your question. What do we do? How do we make the mayor or whomever do what we need done? And it has to be through a collective effort where we do have common goals, common values, and a common endpoint. We can't do this ad hoc. And I appreciate everybody up here. I read the report, but hearing it was sobering.
Yes, it really was. It really
I'm
was.
sorry. I cried when I read that report. I almost cried today. Because we are not valuing the human.
Those are our children.
They are our children.
They are our children.
And unless we make certain that somebody who can make decisions that we form embraces that idea, we're going to have this discussion 20 years from now. And that's just not acceptable. So, I know I said...
So, yes, thank you so much. I'll go back to some of what I said in my introduction, that a culture of peace doesn't allow for that kind of thing. It doesn't allow children to carry guns to middle school. It's not just law enforcement. It's an attitude about how we live with each other. And I think the people in this room seem to understand that. That's why you're here. Okay, I've got another question. A pediatrician writes, as pediatricians, we are sort of upstream on this whole situation. And how can the state help the medical community increase awareness and intervene through either medical or hospital-based things? What do we do in the meantime before we have this beautiful system all set up and running?
Well, and again, you know, the way I look at it, there's some things that we're putting into play to keep this predictive analysis going, but that doesn't mean that we can't evolve as we're doing all that. And there's another effort underway, which involves the healthcare delivery system. And there is a not-for-profit organization that was created called the Delaware Center on Health Innovation. And what we're looking at relative to that center, and it's not a place you go to, it looks at how do we create health and wellness across our state. And we've created what we're forming are healthy neighborhoods. And that's really what we want. We want healthy communities, healthy neighborhoods, and the healthcare system needs to play a critical role in that delivery of overall care. And so there will be identification relative to healthy neighborhoods. Every neighborhood in the state and how they define neighborhoods is through a health system, which is a hospital, as well as a federally qualified health center, and then working with the communities themselves. And I think we already have a tremendous start in the city of Wilmington, because what I see is happening in the city of Wilmington are communities are empowering themselves. They have to, but it gives an opportunity, just like the CDC had an opportunity to come in, thanks to Councilwoman Shabazz, to look at researching that is going to gain great opportunity across the United States. The city of Wilmington has created these, they're empowering their own communities with people from the community. And so what I envision is those communities, in concert with the work that's going on in health delivery, and think health big, not just health care, health delivery, we can actually look at this, what's happening with this violence, and get additional funding. And when you talk about the sustainability, that is a critical piece. And that's why I think funders also have to be engaged with these discussions and how we want to collaborate all over the place. But states have, like, the public dollars are here too. And what I see happening with our public dollars, many times we fragment. We fragment across to agencies, so we don't bring it all the way up to scale. And so that we need, and I know Henry and I have been talking about that even between our department and the children's department, since Henry spent a lot of his public service career over at the kids department. And it benefits our department that he did, because we can talk about how do we really direct funding to those at highest risk.
And we're doing an awful lot in early childhood education. It's been a big initiative, because how do you make a difference? You start when they're little, and before, in good early education, preschool, stars, all those things make a big difference. I know you have a lot of questions.
Yeah, my grandson lives in New York City, where there is now universal public pre-K, which is a really important thing. I'm really grateful for that that innovation. It's rolling out now. If the person who asked this, if I get this garbled, help me. Okay, this is about the data. The school-related data regarding the extent and disproportionate race, gender-based suspension and expulsion is very well documented by the federal government, not just in this study, but in other ways.
Right.
And it's in the evidence-based intervention strategy slide. Why is professional development missing? The current response is punitive. And can we talk about the balance between, law enforcement and punishment and prison, and the other side of the interventions that would keep kids from getting suspended from school, et cetera?
Well, we're gonna look to see if we can put back the slide that they're referring to, but if I understand the question correctly, is what can we do to not be punitive when something goes wrong? And that's a big question, because it starts obviously with intervention as early as possible. But more than that, once they're involved in the criminal justice system, what are we doing to make sure they don't continue and get out and can be successful? Many people have had run-ins with the police, and they still turn out to be great citizens. So what are we doing with juvenile justice? What are we doing to, yes, you holding up your hand?
Ray, Virginia.
That's your question. Would you want to elaborate on it, Ray?
Would you stand up, please?
Before you even get to the criminal justice system. And so it's very well documented, the disproportionate race-based suspension, expulsion. The dropout slide doesn't carry it through because it's called push-out. They don't actually go and register that they dropped out. So that's just very well documented. So in the slide it had the, I forget what the language was, but it had
The recommendations?
Yes, it had recommendations, and then under school-related, it had coping mechanisms for students, but no reference to what are adults going to do differently. Adults are making those decisions.
Yeah, and I think, Ray, a lot of that, that's the benefit of the Community Advisory Board, because remember, the CDC was given a charge, which they fulfilled the charge, and then came up with recommendations some recommendations, but I think what is, again, I use the word stunning, is the role of education in this framework, and we as a community can decide, again, CDC did not give us an operational plan. They just said, here's some things you might want to consider as you're putting together an operational plan utilizing our data. The beauty of the data is it generates who is most at risk. And then how can we use that data? But we can come up with how do we want to advance from an operational perspective and make our own recommendations? But you bring up a great point. I know you and I even talked about the number of African American students that are in our special education system. And back in the 90s, Delaware ranked as the highest state that put children who are Black in special education. And I think that's telling. I mean, I think that is very telling as well. Now, what Senator Henry reflected on, because of the work that we're currently trying to engage in early education, and even with the daycares, and really looking at that level, because we know that children have been at risk because they're not kindergarten ready. And so they're already slipping before they even get into kindergarten. And that's why, you know, Governor Markell really wanted to dedicate, how do we, again, go upstream? Because that's going upstream. Why are these children not kindergarten ready? That's population health. Let's go upstream and then start intervening before kindergarten. So, but we haven't reaped those benefits yet, but I believe they're coming, but that still means at every level, you don't sacrifice those students of today to wait for those early childhood.
Correct.
Right. That's right.
Absolutely. One of the things,
Concert with.
right.
Adults
One,
must change it.
one of the things is we passed a law in our infinite lack of wisdom that children could get out of school at 16. Now Representative Heffernan has a bill that says you have to stay in school till you're 18. And you mentioned about being pushed out. And many children drop out because they don't feel welcome, they're not being helped, and there's nothing, they don't feel that there's anything there for them. So the fact that we're going to make them require that they stay longer will give educators an opportunity to hopefully work with them and try to begin to affect change, because we are harming our children dramatically. And if you're a child in the inner city in Wilmington especially, we have got to get this neighborhood education program off. And you've got to call your legislators. We've got to get started. We cannot continue to let what has happened in Wilmington continue. I mean, we have a moral obligation to really see that this legislation is passed to get started.
I really feel compelled that we need to name institutional racism around
There is definitely institutional racism at play in the decisions that are being made.
I was a teacher a long time ago, and boys fight. They do. They're full of testosterone and they fight. But now it's criminalized. It's criminalized, and it's criminalized against mostly black boys, not white boys. And we need to name that, and we need to deal with that. If I had a son in school today, it would be frightening. And it's unacceptable. It's unacceptable. It needs to be seen through the lens of...
I'm going to stick to my written questions.
Can I just make one comment?
Yeah.
The other thing I think that Ray was mentioning is the fact of diversity and cultural training among the teachers, because that's a big aspect of what's happening in our schools. That's the reason for the expulsions and things of that nature. They do not understand. Whenever they act out, the first thing they do is send them out. And I think that retired teachers should be able to go in and mentor to beginning teachers and without affecting their pension.
That could be a law.
We might need the legislature for that. Is that right? Okay. This is a question about downstream, not upstream. If we think of the 429 cases or 421 cases that were studied as symptomatic of the disease, is there an estimate of the population size or a percentage of population that are carriers of that disease, symptoms, but that's i.e. symptomatic,
Yep.
but scoring high in the role in the risk profile? You understand the question?
I do, and
Yeah.
I think they probably a predisposition. I think is what that is, and we know with addiction there's predisposition. We know certain things that occur. I also must tell you, because when you heard about the underground drug trafficking, addiction is alive and well, and what a horrific disease. And a lot, I think, of what you're seeing is related to that disease. And we also know that there's a predisposition to addiction. So at the same time, we have an epidemic. You hear about heroin, right? You hear about heroin. The root cause of heroin is addiction. We have an addiction epidemic, which has resulted in heroin. So this comes into play with everything we're talking about as well.
And indeed, I would say, I don't have the science based on that question, so I can't address that. But is there a predisposition to gun violence? Absolutely. When you heard the analysis, that was your question. There's those common factors, but even more so, there's probably more work that could have been done relative to that.
Dr. Chen, you want to clarify?
Oh, did I not understand?
Perhaps some of that question is alluding to the concept of violence as a contagious disease. And actually, I spoke on a panel about half a year ago addressing that specific issue. And some of the conceptualizations about violence, as we could see in the CDC report, was exposure to violence itself primes people to commit acts of violence as well. And so you can think about it as an infectious disease or from a contagious model. And the thing is, when it starts to spread like that, you can see it kind of spreading in communities and geographic pockets. And it's not something that, there are all of these other sort of factors that do feed into it, but purely that exposure to violence itself, we know from childhood on through adulthood has continuing, ongoing effects, not just only in relation to the expression of violence later as well, but other mental health issues. And what I suspect is a lot of things related to behavioral health, including addiction, is that oftentimes it's self-medication in response to trauma.
Response to trauma. Yeah, that's what we are.
Thank you. That was good. To respect your time, we're gonna stop now. I ask you to do three things. First of all, let's put some pressure on the city to take the $1.5 million and give up a little bit of data in return. All right? And you can do that just by calling the mayor's office.
No, don't call him. Never do any.
What should we do, Senator?
His chief of staff is here. He has been talked to. The legislators who represent the city of Wilmington, we've written him letters. We've had meetings. It's not working. The citizens need to say, we put you in office and we want this change. And you need to go down there collectively as a group and march and sit in until he changes, because getting letters from us is not working. It's not working. And you elected him, so you have power. The power's in the hands of the people. So use your power.
All right, let's use our power. We'll figure out how to do that.
Oh, we're not trying to take over the city. We're not trying to take over the rule of the city. That is just false.
Julie? Yes.
I did have one comment. As I'm an attorney in town as well. I'm Stephanie Hansen. I'm an attorney in town who's a former president of the County Council. And it occurs to me, the General Assembly giveth and the General Assembly then taketh away. The General Assembly can't decide, regardless of what is ever in an agreement with the mayor, that they're going to take over the policing of the city. So it doesn't have to be, if the language is problematic in the agreement, you can take it out and it will not affect the city of Wilmington, the General Assembly's ability to take over policing. It's sort of telegraphing the intent that if you don't do the following things, we're going to take it over. But you don't have to have it in there. So if that's bothering him, take it out.
All right, I don't want to get into the weeds on this one. Second thing I want you to do is make sure you signed in and we have your email address. Otherwise, we can't contact you and you can't be invited to the next Movement for a Culture of Peace Forum. And the third thing I want you to do is to thank our panelists for a very fine presentation.